For more than a century, in museums and textbooks across the world, the story of the horse was told as one of humanity's proudest achievements. Somewhere on the open grasslands of Asia, the story went, a band of Stone Age people crept up on a herd of wild horses, captured them, broke them, and climbed onto their backs. From that single moment, everything followed. Riders, armies, empires, trade routes, the spread of languages across whole continents. The horse was the engine of human history, and we had built it ourselves. The trouble with that story is that almost every part of it has now turned out to be wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong about where it happened. Wrong about when it happened. Wrong about which animals were even involved. And the thing that proved it wrong was not a new fossil or a new dig. It was ancient DNA, pulled from the bones of hundreds of long-dead horses scattered across Eurasia. What that ancient DNA revealed has overturned the single most important animal partnership in human civilization. The first domestic horses were not the ancestors of the horse, you know. The place everyone pointed to for decades was the wrong place. And the real birth of the modern horse happened so suddenly, and so recently, that scientists are still struggling to explain how it was even possible. Let's begin. For decades, the leading candidate for the birthplace of the domestic horse was a place called Botai, in the windswept steppes of northern Kazakhstan. The Botai culture lived there around 5,500 years ago, and the archaeological evidence they left behind seemed overwhelming. Botai sites were littered with horse bones, tens of thousands of them, far more than any ordinary hunting people would normally leave behind. There were traces of what looked like fenced corrals, patches of soil stained by the chemical residue of horse manure, and broken pottery that, when analyzed in the laboratory, still carried the fatty signature of mare's milk soaked into the clay. The people at Botai were not simply hunting horses for meat. They appeared to be keeping them, herding them, penning them, and milking them, generation after generation. The single most striking piece of evidence at Botai was found inside the horses' mouths. On the premolar teeth of several Botai horses, archaeologists identified a very particular kind of wear, a beveling and chipping on the surface of the teeth that closely matched the damage left by a bit, a hard mouthpiece of a bridle pressing against the teeth over time. Bit wear meant bridles. Bridles meant control and steering, and control meant that the people of Botai 5,500 years ago had not only herded horses, but had very likely climbed onto their backs and ridden them. For years, this single detail made Botai the textbook answer to one of the greatest questions in all of prehistory. This, nearly everyone agreed, was the exact place where humans and horses first truly came together. The Botai consensus held firm for years, until a geneticist named Ludovic Orlando decided to put it to a test no one had been able to run before. Ludovic Orlando, a paleogeneticist who had spent his career learning to extract and read DNA from ancient animal bones, realized he could check the theory directly rather than relying on teeth and pottery and circumstantial clues. In 2018, Orlando and his colleagues sequenced the actual DNA of the Botai horses and lined it up against the DNA of modern domestic horses. The logic was simple and unavoidable. If Botai really was the cradle of the domestic horse, then the Botai horses should turn out to be the direct ancestors, or at the very least the close cousins, of every horse alive on Earth today. What the genomes actually said stunned everyone involved. The Botai horses were not the ancestors of modern horses at all. When Ludovic Orlando read the genetic results, the bones pointed in a direction nobody had predicted. The Botai horses were instead the ancestors of the Przewalski's horse, the stocky, dun-colored, short-maned animal that survives today only on the remote grasslands of Mongolia. For generations, the Przewalski's horse had been celebrated around the world as the last truly wild horse left on the planet, a living fossil that had supposedly never felt a human hand. Orlando's DNA evidence flipped that cherished story completely inside out. The Przewalski's horse was not pristine and wild after all. It was feral. It was the escaped descendant of the very horses that had been herded and managed at Botai thousands of years earlier, domestic animals that had later slipped human control and returned to the wild. The implications of that one finding were staggering, and they spread through the field like a shockwave. The famous domestication at Botai had been entirely real, but it had led straight into a dead end. Those horses had been tamed, penned, milked, and perhaps even bridled and ridden, and then their entire lineage had simply stopped, surviving into the present only as the feral Przewalski's horse of Mongolia. They had contributed almost nothing to the horses that would later carry armored knights, pull war chariots, and reshape the map of the world. When the geneticists measured it precisely, they found that modern domestic horses carry only around 3% of Botai-related ancestry, a faint genetic echo and nothing more. The first great domestication of the horse had been a magnificent dead branch on the tree. The reframing of the Przewalski's horse alone was enough to unsettle conservationists and biologists everywhere. For decades, the Przewalski's horse had been protected and bred and reintroduced into the wild under the proud belief that it represented the very last wild horse, the only equine on Earth that had never been domesticated. Ludovic Orlando's genetic work meant that this belief was, in a sense, a beautiful mistake. There were, by this new understanding, no truly wild horses left anywhere on the planet at all. Every horse alive, whether the racehorse in its stable or the shaggy Przewalski's horse on the Mongolian plain, traced back to an animal that human hands had once managed. The truly wild horse, the untouched ancestor of them all, had quietly gone extinct, leaving only domesticated and feral descendants behind. This left the entire field of horse research in a strange and deeply uncomfortable position. Ludovic Orlando and his colleagues had just demolished the reigning theory, and in the process they had wiped out the accepted answer without putting a new one in its place. If the modern horse had not come from Botai, then it had come from somewhere else, somewhere still completely unknown. The ancestor of nearly every horse on the planet had effectively vanished from the map overnight. As Orlando himself described it, the search was suddenly back at the starting gate, and the area they now had to search was almost unimaginably large. It was, in his own words, all of Eurasia, an entire continent of grassland and forest, and mountain to comb through, one ancient bone at a time. To find the true homeland of the modern horse, Ludovic Orlando launched what became one of the most ambitious projects in the entire history of ancient DNA. Over the following years, Orlando assembled a large international team of archaeologists and geneticists, and began gathering horse bones from across the whole of Eurasia, from Spain in the west to Siberia in the east, from Anatolia in the south to the edge of the Arctic in the north. They pulled samples from hundreds of archaeological sites, spanning many thousands of years of history. The goal was bold and precise. By sequencing enough ancient horse genomes from enough times and places, they could watch the modern lineage actually appear in the genetic record and then trace it backward to the exact region where it had first been born. In the end, the team sequenced the genomes of more than 270 ancient horses, assembling a kind of genetic time-lapse of the animal stretched across an entire continent. When the data from those 270 genomes was finally assembled and analyzed, the lost homeland of the modern horse came sharply into focus. The answer was the Western Eurasian steppe, and more precisely a region in what is now southern Russia, the lower Volga-Don area, the grasslands lying north of the Caspian and Black Seas. It was here the DNA showed, without ambiguity, that a particular lineage of horse, the one geneticists now call Dom2, short for the second domestication, first emerged as a distinct and recognizable population. This Dom2 horse was the true ancestor of the modern horse, and it had been hiding in plain sight all along, in a region that researchers had largely overlooked while they spent years arguing about Botai far away to the east. But the most shocking part of the whole discovery was not the where, it was the when, and above all, the how fast. The genomes revealed that for most of prehistory, the steppes and plains of Eurasia had been home to many different, genetically distinct horse populations, a sprawling patchwork of regional types, each one adapted to its own particular corner of the continent. There were horses in Iberia, horses in Anatolia, horses in Central Asia, horses across Siberia, all genetically separate from one another. Then, beginning around 4,200 years ago, that ancient diversity suddenly began to collapse. The Dom2 lineage out of the Volga-Don region erupted outward and swept across the continent, rapidly replacing almost every other horse population that lay in its path. In the space of just a few short centuries, A single type of horse went from a single local population to the one dominant horse of all Eurasia. The sheer speed of that spread is almost impossible to overstate. Within roughly 300 to 500 years, the modern horse lineage had overrun a vast territory stretching from central Anatolia to central Russia and far beyond, erasing the local genetic diversity that had built up over tens of thousands of years. By around 3,000 years ago, the Great Replacement was essentially complete. Almost every single domestic horse on Earth today descends from that one explosive expansion out of the western steppe, an event so rapid and so total that the geneticists who uncovered it reached for the image of a wildfire racing across dry grassland to describe what they were seeing in the data. The obvious and burning question is why? Why did this one horse lineage, around 4,200 years ago, suddenly conquer an entire continent when horses of one kind or another had already been living alongside humans for well over 1,000 years? The DNA itself offered a powerful clue, hidden inside the genomes of the DOM2 horses. When researchers examined those genomes closely, they found two specific genetic changes that set the DOM2 horses sharply apart from all the horses that came before. Two traits that had clearly been put under intense selection right the moment the expansion began. One of these changes affected the animal's back and spine, linked to a stronger, more robust, more weight-bearing skeleton. The other change affected the animal's behavior, producing a calmer, more docile, less fearful, more cooperative temperament. Put those two traits together and the meaning becomes almost impossible to miss. The people of the Western Steppe, around 4,200 years ago, had bred into existence a horse that was both physically capable of carrying a human rider across long distances and temperamentally willing to actually allow it. A stronger back to bear the weight of a person and their gear, and a calmer mind to accept a rider rather than panic and flee. For the first time in history, the horse had become a dependable, controllable vehicle. And a dependable vehicle in the ancient world changed absolutely everything that followed. The culture most closely associated with this transformation is the Santashta, a people who lived in the southern Ural steppes around 4,000 years ago. The Santashta are famous among archaeologists for a remarkable invention that turns up again and again in their burial mounds, the great earthen kurgans where they laid their dead alongside sacrificed horses. The Santashta built the earliest known chariots with true spoked wheels, light, fast, two-wheeled war vehicles pulled by these new and improved horses. The combination of the DOM2 horse and the spoked wheel chariot was nothing short of a revolution in speed, transport, and warfare. Suddenly, human beings could move and trade and fight faster than any person had ever been able to move before, and that astonishing new capability radiated outward across the ancient world, carried on hooves and wooden wheels, together with the horse itself. The Santashta burials themselves reveal just how central the horse and chariot had become to these steppe people around 4,000 years ago. In the Santashta kurgans, archaeologists have found entire chariots dismantled and placed into graves, along with horses sacrificed and arranged in careful, deliberate pairs, the way a team would have been harnessed in life. These were not casual animals to the Santashta. They were prized possessions worthy of being buried with their owners for the journey beyond death, treated with the same reverence a warrior might give his finest weapons. Direct chemical analysis of ancient human teeth from this era has even detected the proteins of horse milk, showing that these people drank from their herds as well as rode and drove them. The horse had moved to the very heart of steppe life, as food, as transport, as weapon, and as a symbol of status and power. There is a deeper and stranger twist buried inside this new timeline, one that quietly rewrites another major chapter of the human story. For a very long time, scholars had believed that the great migrations which carried the Indo-European languages out of the steppe and across Europe and Asia beginning around 5,000 years ago had been powered and driven by horses. The popular image was one of mounted steppe warriors riding out from the grasslands to spread their languages, their customs, and their genes across the ancient world. But the new ancient DNA evidence severs that link cleanly. The modern domestic horse, the rideable Dom-2 horse, did not begin its spread until around 4,200 years ago, several centuries after those earliest Indo-European migrations had already taken place. The people who first carried these languages out of the steppe did so largely on foot and in slow ox-drawn wagons, not from the back of a galloping horse. The horse, as it turns out, arrived later, to dramatically accelerate a process of expansion that was already well underway. The story the genomes tell also reframes just how quickly human beings reshaped this animal once they finally found the right one to work with. Laurent France, a paleogeneticist who studies the domestication of animals, observed that humans changed the horse genome stunningly quickly and suggested that this was possible precisely because the people of the steppe already had thousands of years of accumulated experience domesticating other creatures, animals like sheep, goats, and cattle. By the time the people of the western steppe set out to refine and perfect the horse, they were not fumbling beginners. They were highly skilled animal breeders who understood selection, who knew exactly which qualities they wanted, and who reshaped the horse to fit human needs in a span of time that, measured against the slow clock of evolution, is very nearly instantaneous. Step back from all of it, and the modern scientific picture of horse domestication looks almost nothing like the old story in the textbooks. There was not one single domestication of the horse. There were at least two of them, and they were profoundly, fundamentally different events. The first, at Botai around 5,500 years ago, produced a herded, milked, and possibly ridden animal whose bloodline led only to the feral Przewalski's horse of Mongolia, and then went no further. The second, in the lower Volga-Don region around 4,200 years ago, produced the Dom-2 lineage, the genuine ancestor of nearly every horse alive on Earth today, an animal deliberately bred for a strong back and a calm temperament that then spread across all of Eurasia like a wildfire on the wind. The animal that changed the course of human history, then, was not simply a wild creature that we crept up on, captured, and tamed. The modern horse was something far closer to an invention, a deliberately engineered animal, refined and reshaped over generations on a specific patch of the southern Russian steppe, and then unleashed upon the world. The horses that came before it, the Botai horses, and the countless regional populations that had once roamed everywhere from the hills of Iberia to the plains of Mongolia, were very nearly wiped from existence, their ancient genetic diversity swallowed whole by the relentless spread of this single superior lineage. What does all of this mean for the horse you might picture right now, grazing quietly in a green field, or galloping in slow motion across a screen? It means that the animal in your mind is the direct descendant of a single, astonishing burst of human ingenuity that took place around 4,000 years ago. Every racing thoroughbred, every heavy plow horse, every gentle pony at a fair carries inside it the genetic signature of that explosion out of the western steppe, the strong back and the quiet, willing mind that those ancient steppe breeders so carefully selected for. The horse is not a fragment of wild nature that we merely borrowed for a while. The horse is something that human beings made, and then rode straight into the very center of human civilization. For more than a century, we believed that we had captured the horse. The ancient DNA now tells us a far stranger truth. We did not simply tame the horse. We built it on purpose, in one place, in just a few short centuries. And the version we built was so overwhelmingly successful that it conquered a continent and erased very nearly every horse that had ever come before it. The thunder of hooves that carried empires, armies, and entire languages across the ancient world was never really the sound of wild nature finally tamed. It was the sound of one of humanity's first and greatest acts of engineering, running free across the grasslands of the world. If you found the story of the horse remarkable, consider subscribing. There are more origins to uncover, and the DNA is only beginning to tell us what it knows.